Counsel.
You're listening to Get Down to Business, the show all about small business, jobs, and entrepreneurship. We are powered by Tandem HR, your solution center. You could give them a call, 630-928-0510, 630-928-0510. Check out their website, tandemhr.com. So there was an election. I think it was a few days ago, a few weeks ago. I don't know. It seems like distant memory, but there was a lot of promises made. And now we have a new President-elect Trump. He's talking a lot about infrastructure. Thrilled to be joined by Norm Anderson, who has commissioned a poll to determine the impact of this political discourse on infrastructure policy. Norm, welcome back to Get Down to Business.
Hey, thank you very much. Good to hear you again.
Absolutely. So let's talk about infrastructure and sort of a debrief after the election. A lot of promises, a lot of commitment. Trump has talked a little bit about investing a lot of money, although perhaps it's a drop in the bucket in terms of what's needed in infrastructure. What do you think about his promises, and what do you think about sort of this post-election? Let's look at what's next.
Sure. Look, I think the promises are great. I think, $1 trillion over the next 8 to 10 years makes a lot of sense. Our calculation is actually that we need about $2.4 trillion, which is just an amazing amount of money. But one of the things that's going on is that, you hear politicians talking about roads and bridges. What you really need is to think about what the global economy is going to look like and how we need to invest to be as successful as possible in creating jobs for that new economy. So you've got, a big issue. You got the sort of the legacy infrastructure stuff. Then you got what would you do with driverless vehicles, 32 billion sensors on buildings all over cities across the country to make that work. And then you've got to just figure out, my goodness, how quickly the global economy evolved over the last 10 years and how little infrastructure we built. What kind of investment do we need to make to be successful from now until 2025? And how are we going to grow the kind of economy that's going to allow our people to have good jobs?
So why do people not talk about this enough? We'll get to the politics about it in a second, and I firmly believe this is a good bipartisan example of ways to work together. But, we all use the roads. I'm flying this weekend, and O'Hare, while it might be better than LaGuardia, it's still not great. Why is I know you mentioned to me that an early Obama White House veteran told you that if infrastructure is not a top 3 issue, then nothing will get done. There will be no oxygen for it. Why do people not realize that this is such a major concern?
I think there are a lot of issues, but one of the big issues, and it's a federal government-caused problem, is that we don't look at infrastructure as an investment. We look at it as an expense. So we're always looking in the rearview mirror rather than trying to figure out, if we make these investments, which are 30 to 40-year investments, what do they have to create in terms of jobs, and then documenting that? What do they have to create in terms of business opportunities, documenting that? We don't see that, right? So we get a sense that we just have to have more taxes and hopefully we get better roads or better airports. But let me go to your airport issue as well, just quickly, because I think it's fascinating. All the airports in the U.S. are publicly owned. Why should that be? It'd be phenomenal if you could come up with a public-private model for investing private investment in airports, especially some of the smaller regional airports that are, now sitting there almost unused and have huge local economic development potential.
Absolutely, and again, this is something that we all deal with. And in a moment, I'm going to talk to you about the impact of infrastructure on the economy, particularly as it relates to our small business listeners. Right. So I want to talk about that in a moment. But once again, we're chatting with Norm Anderson. You're the president of a global consulting firm, a nonpartisan consulting firm based in Washington, D.C., and you focus on infrastructure. Let's talk about the politics of this. Trump promised the $1 trillion. You believe a lot more is needed. Is this something that he'll be able to work with the Democratic leaders in the House and Senate, assuming it's Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer? Is this something that he's going to be able to get the Democrats on board, but perhaps not the Republicans?
Actually, I think it's a perfect bipartisan issue. What I worry about, I'll get to your question. I worry about the ability of any political administration to manage an infrastructure initiative of this magnitude, but it strikes me that someone whose background is as a developer has a better chance than a normal politician in terms of being able to get this done. But, from a Democrat versus Republican point of view, it's fascinating, right? Because infrastructure has always been a Democratic issue. But what we're seeing right now is that Democrats like this issue a lot. It creates jobs, creates union jobs, creates opportunities. Republicans like this issue a lot as long as it's revenue neutral, where you can bring in private investment opportunities. And then if you go to your point, which I think is really important, the small business piece of this, 40% of invoicing to infrastructure projects comes from small and medium-sized businesses. So it's a huge opportunity creator for that segment of the economy that I think voted pretty dramatically, overwhelmingly for Trump. So, you've got the union guys who favor it, you've got the small business guys who favor it, you've got the Democrats who favor it, and you've got the president of the Republicans trying to make sure that they stay in line. So in terms of having the forces aligned, it makes a lot of sense. I just worry about the level of sophistication in thinking in Washington to be able to really build infrastructure for a 10-year period, making investments, productive ones, in the right kinds of projects.
So, Norm, let's zoom out for a second. While infrastructure may not have made the list of what is at the tip of people's tongues in terms of what's important to them as they talked about the issues of this past election, overwhelmingly, and I do believe this is the reason why Trump partially won, is jobs. Everybody wants to talk about jobs. Norm, you and I agree that investing in infrastructure is also investing in jobs. Do people not understand the connection?
Well, I think, I think it's been mismanaged pretty dramatically over the last 25 or so years, where you're promised massive infrastructure investments to create wonderful jobs. People seem to think that the investments happened, but the jobs didn't get created. But if you look at the Obama stimulus, that was $700 billion, but only $85 billion of that went to infrastructure, and that's over a 10-year period through 2017. So not a big infrastructure initiative came out of the Obama administration. So, connecting those dots is impossible because the beginning point didn't really exist as it was advertised.
So, Norm, we've got about a minute and a half remaining. You mentioned some numbers in terms of what you think is needed for infrastructure investment. We talked a little bit about airports. We talked a little bit about the roads. What are the other areas that you think, if you had the checkbook, that you think we need the investment in other areas of infrastructure as well?
Well, one of the things we need to do is we need to make sure that our cities are fantastic, and I think the big piece of that is transit. I think another big piece of that is our wastewater and wastewater systems, right? You can't have things like happened in Flint happen anywhere else ever. But there's also, how do you get investment into projects? So, for instance, there's probably $150 billion in what we call state of good repair opportunities in our transit systems, which is perfect for private investors to get involved in replacing generators and rolling stock and that kind of thing. So there's great opportunities in airports, transit, water, wastewater, important opportunities. Then there's opportunities for the future in terms of driverless vehicles. What are you going to do with all the parking garages when you don't have cars parking in them for 95% of their usable lives? So you get to transform that piece of our cities into something that's much more interesting and much more productive.
Sure.
And there's a way to think through how to get private investment, especially small and medium-sized business is involved in investing in our infrastructure.
And Norm, what I think about is the opportunities for faster transit, railroad investment. People, again, talking about small business, the ability for people to conduct business more effectively between different cities. I'm here in the Midwest, but between New York and Boston, D.C. and Boston, along the West Coast of the Midwest. Lots more to talk about next time. Norm Anderson, how can people learn more about this important study that you commissioned and learn more about your important work?
Thank you very much. Just go to our website, www.cg-la.com, and you can download our Blueprint 2025 study.
Fantastic. Norm Anderson, we appreciate your prioritization of this important issue. We'll be sure to follow the progress, and I know that over the coming weeks before the inauguration, I know you'll continue to be talking up this issue. Appreciate you joining us. Coming up after the break, we've got more tips, advice, and information for all of you listeners on Get Down to Business. As always, you can get on my website, shalomklein.com. Download podcasts of conversations like this with Norm Anderson and future guests. We'll be right back.
Christmas